Podsmashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
Itty Beer Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. And you guys might be wondering why there's a second, third tink. We are welcoming a guest on our show tonight, but first we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together topics that you care about with video games.
Did we say where gaming goes to grab a beer?
Yes, and we tinked.
Okay.
We are your hosts.
Where were you 5 seconds?
Penguin.
Man, you're doing it. All things out of order. Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
I am Termite.
And we are joined today by Kevin, our
Yay.
friend Kevin again, who
Welcome back.
Thank you.
joined us on our beer pairing episode, and he is now joining us to talk this week about gaming in the 80s. This is the last of our series, Gaming by the Decade, before we close out the 2010s.
Yeah.
That we're calling them 2010s.
I assume it'll be the
I think
10s.
there needs to be a
We should just call them the
more
10s.
elegant.
Tots.
The tots.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I like it.
Oh,
The
my
tot and
gosh.
nubiles. Yep. So we're going to finish off. We'll do that as our New Year episode where we'll do one more Gaming by the Decade and then close it out for another decade, I guess. Move on to other different other franchises, other series. So yeah, so that's what we'll be talking about today, but we are where gaming goes to grab a beer. So what beer are we drinking today, Kevin?
He brought us a beer.
Yeah, this is Stone. Never know how to pronounce this. Stone's. I'm just going to say Coco Vesa because it starts with an X. It's like some ancient Mayan, Incan. I don't know my.
I think it's a Shoko,
South
like
American.
Shokoveza.
Shokoveza?
Yeah.
Probably.
Shokobesa.
So it's
I don't know.
a.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's an imperial stout, and it's inspired by Mexican hot chocolate, and it has coffee, pasilla peppers, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg in it.
What style
So
of
it is
beer
like
is it?
a Christmas Mexican hot chocolate. It is an imperial stout.
Yes. It's
It
dark,
is
thick,
delish.
and amazing.
And it is actually readily available this time of year.
Nice.
It's usually on the shelves through January, from like October through January.
Awesome. I love Stone. I was just there this past weekend, but I'll talk about that in my favorite things. That's a little tease.
Yeah.
So my impressions of this beer is I love it. This is like my first really, well, no. This is one of the darkest beers I've had so far this season.
Okay.
And
Same here.
man, I love it. It's like, so it definitely tastes like chocolate. It's like drinking a bar of chocolate right now that's got alcohol in
Oh
it.
yeah, I should have clarified. Is it a milk stout? I think it's a milk stout.
Wait, does it have an inscription on the
It
bottle?
does say contains lactose. So yeah, it's an imperial milk stout.
Oh, do you want me to read the
Should have
thing on the
probably
bottle?
asked
You
if
always
anyone's
gotta read the
lactose
label.
I gotta
intolerant.
read the label. So, this is a beloved stout. When first introduced as a limited special celebrate collaboration released with San Diego homebrewer Chris Banker after his recipe won our annual homebrew competition and Cerveceria Insurgente. Okay, don't know what that is. It was an instant hit with fans began clamoring for its return. Seeing as how amazing its flavor profile is and evocative of Mexican hot chocolate featuring coffee, pasilla peppers, vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and
Vanilla.
chocolate. We concluded it was the perfect beer to re-release in celebration of the holidays and the entire winter season. This creamy Imperial Mocha Stout is now a highly anticipated yearly tradition that we are pleased to present from us to you and makes a perfect wintry gift from you to your friends, loved ones, or simply yourself. Cheers.
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 Indeed. Let me see this can. So this is readily available.
It was so hard to read, though. Like, man, I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
the light was
Oh,
reflecting.
the word
it
that you were
tiny.
confused about is Cerveceria Insurgente, and that is the name of the homebrew competition.
Oh, gotcha. It's good. It's very, very full body, good mouthfeel. Just saying words now.
Yeah, it's great.
Cerveceria, like beer.
Right.
Cerveza.
Yep.
Huh.
And then Insurgente, like insurgents.
Yeah.
How about that?
I'll go with that.
So, what is happening on in the goings on? I guess we're going to be spending the rest of this evening after recording this, doing a recording that you probably have all already heard, and talking a lot about we're finally going to catch up on the BlizzCon Fallout.
Yes, so all of the announcements, I guess, we'll have in the bonus episode, which you'll have already
which
heard.
they'll have already heard. Is there
Yes.
anything non-Blizzard related that you wanted to talk about?
Yes, Hideo Kojima's game Death Stranding is coming out, and by the time this episode launches, it'll already been out. But the embargo just lifted, so the reviews are out there, so it's in the news, it's in the hype. As you may know, Hideo Kojima broke away from Konami over 3 years ago and started his own studio, Kojima Productions, from the ground up. And no one believed that this game would be here this fast. And everyone was like, yeah, we'll see that in like 25 on the PS5 and the Xbox Scarlet. But here it is. It's finally here. It was gold weeks ago, and it looks
pretty
fun.
good.
I read some reviews. I watched some videos. It seems extremely interesting. very artsy.
Yeah, the reviews I've said all said to temper your expectations.
Yeah.
Because, like, again, everyone sees this. Everyone wants this game to be a win for, like, the independent auteur of gaming. And they want, like, the genius artist breaks away from the oppressive big budget studio and makes a genius game.
Right.
No longer shackled by the restrictions of the big budget studio. And they say, it's not that, but it's still good. I've heard it described as a beautiful mess, like a mess of a game, but wonderful and crazy good in its own way.
It's built on the Decima engine, which was used for Horizon Zero Dawn. So it's made by Guerrilla Games. That's the engine that he used, and he worked with Guerrilla Games in developing this. That's how he did it so fast, and it looks amazing. And it seems like this big open world sprawl where your main task as Sam, it's the name of the main character, you deliver stuff. You're a delivery man.
It's in the walking simulator vein of games, but with looks like a little bit of that like Zelda Breath of the Wild inspired traversal puzzling.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So it's like you have to map a route for your mission from where you are to where it needs to go.
You have to make choices.
You can choose the route, but it might have to go over a mountain. And if that's the case, you have to get specialized gear, ropes and ladders, and you have to equip yourself with stuff that makes it so you can carry them, because you also have to maintain balance when you stack a bunch of boxes on you. So you're like using the triggers apparently to like balance through the mountain to like get on the other side. And it's asynchronous and it's multiplayer, so someone else who had already done the mission may have laid a ladder there for you, and you're like, oh, that's helpful, and you can like that ladder, and it's like a currency in the game. So it's so you're super lonely. You're all by yourself. This is why it's called like
This
Strand.
is a social media experiment.
Yeah,
That's
it
what
kind of is.
It is, yeah.
And so you're super lonely. You're by yourself in this lonely, giant open world landscape, and then all of a sudden you just stumble upon like a bridge over a river that's ridiculously helpful from someone else who had went before you, and then you can like that, and they build up likes, and that's like a currency system to help them upgrade stuff.
I guess the only thing I'm worried about, that all sounds interesting. It sounds like it's going to be a really cool game. What I'm worried about is it's coming off the heels of PT. It's the first literal thing he's made since PT, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And all of the trailers and everything made it look like a horror game.
Yeah, it seemed very scary.
So I don't, again, I have not read any reviews where they've been like, it is a horror masterpiece.
It seems skin crawly creepy, but I wouldn't, from what I mean, the premise about like the baby and the weirdness, and you can Google it, but it seems super creepy, but not to the point of horror, just to probably just subvert normal plot lines, like things that just doesn't. It's way out there.
That's Kojima weird.
It is.
Kojima
exactly.
weird. I get the vibe of it. Makes me think of like Lost, where it's like interesting enough to be unnerving, but then also like I'm worried that it's going to end up like Lost. Kind of
what, Lost?
Exactly, up its own butt, a little full of itself, and without any clear direction. But we'll see. I still am I'm more interested in it now after reading the reviews.
Mm-hmm.
Than I was
get to upgrade
for a while.
cars and cycles, and you get to upgrade roads that charge the cars, and so that whole thing can happen too. So think about, it's not just walking super slowly and keeping balance. Later you have to think about stealing people's cars and like loading those up, and how long will they last, how far can you go.
I've heard you make grenades and bullets out of your bodily fluids.
And supposedly there's rocket launchers at the end, and you become a soft
Some
solid
people
snake.
already do that.
Soft solid.
Soft solid snake.
Yeah.
Like plush snake.
Right.
He's still got he's still solid technically, but a little squishy.
Yep. So it sounds fun. That's pretty much what's been clouding up the gaming industry lately.
Outer Worlds.
Outer Worlds dropped. Have we had a chance to talk about that on the show yet?
Have you had a chance to play it?
No.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't have time.
I think we've talked about it. Yeah, I fired it up. It feels very much like Fallout, for better or for worse. Though I will say it looks much better, and the gunplay is slightly better. A lot of people were describing the gunplay as significantly better. Mm-hmm. It still feels a little stiff to me, but it's fun. I've put an hour or two into it.
You haven't finished it yet?
I used the Xbox Game Pass to buy it for $1, and then I've been playing on my PC. I got the PC version of Game Pass, so I plan on trying a couple other games out before.
Cool.
But
I went to Taco Bell and got the $5 box, and put the code in to not win an Xbox. There's a competition going again. This is the second time they've done this, where you can possibly win an Xbox One X console that makes the Taco Bell dong when you turn it on. I need this. I need this in my life.
Of course you do.
Yeah, I need it.
Of course you do.
So I went to
like you described it as the Taco Bell dong.
yeah, dong.
Yeah, I mean maybe bong or like ding.
Bong probably wouldn't
Dong
be good
is
either.
an entirely different word. Yeah, but it's better than dong.
This is supposed to be a kid-friendly show.
It is.
It's a family-friendly
Yeah.
podcast. So in my efforts to try and win this console, you get a code every time you buy a box, and so I put the code in, and it gave me 14 days of Game Pass. So I put that in and got it. Then I got a second box a week later, and I got another 14-day pass. So
That's awesome. Give
now
that to me.
I've already used it. I'm like, I have an Xbox upstairs. So I have Game Pass. I've been playing Forza Horizon 4 because I can play it with my son. And I love Forza Horizon, so I would not...
He loves cars.
Yeah, he's in. Like, it's awesome. So we've been playing that. That's what I've been using my Game Pass for.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's probably it for news then until we move on to our bonus episode, which you will have already heard. So we'll spare you that. And that brings us to our next segment, which is...
Doing this podcast is our favorite
thing.
Doing this podcast is our favorite
thing.
Favorite
All right.
things is a segment of our show where we just like to update you on what each of our favorite thing is for the week. And as Termite says, it can be as shallow as a nice baby wipe brand that you've used to wipe your hands and realize how clean that leaves you feeling, or it can be as deep and meaningful as an entire spiritual shift in the way that you've perceived reality.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Okay.
So yeah, those that's the spectrum there.
Yep.
So
I feel like that latter one might take like
yeah,
a long
right?
time to talk about.
That's a whole new spin-off podcast right there. But yeah, Kevin, as our guest, would you update us on what your favorite thing is?
Sure. Actually, it's probably leaning towards the latter. I knew this question was coming, and I'm like, what did happen this past week other than normal work? So last Friday, my wife and I went to a friend's house, their family, to have dinner and just hang out there. Had a bonfire afterwards. These were friends that that were very good friends to me when I needed them to be about a year ago. But we had a sort of a falling out and had a reconciliation of sorts. But this was the first time that we had actually gotten back together again, and it was very, very good. We were very thankful to God for that. They were. I got the general idea that there was probably some misjudging all around, and it was just a very peaceful time with them and their kids. So that was probably my biggest thing. And if I can cheat a little, also this weekend I'm going out of town with my wife, and she doesn't know where, but I do.
Ooh.
So, yup.
This is a family-friendly podcast.
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah, and we had our anniversary. Not our anniversary. Our 3-month anniversary.
Yeah.
So,
A quarter.
quarter of a year.
Quarterversary.
Quarterversary.
I like it.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Quartery.
Ooh. A charcuterie.
Sure. No.
So
Don't go there.
That's food.
my favorite thing, Penguin's favorite thing, is I got to see some friends that I had not seen in a while because a friend of mine is getting married at the end of the month. So shout out to Aaron.
I don't know who Aaron is, but shout out
He's a
to
buddy
you.
of mine.
Woohoo! Go, Aaron.
He's getting married, and so we went to his bachelor party. So we went brewery hopping in Richmond. So we hit all those Scott's Edition breweries, Vossen, Strange Ways.
I
down
still
there.
haven't been to Vossen.
It's expensive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like I perceive of breweries as like on the top end you're getting like an $8 beer, on the bottom end you're getting like a $4 beer. Like these were like all $7 and up. This is expensive.
Okay.
So Vossen, Strange Ways, Ardent, Isley, and then we hit Stone because of course we hit Stone. It was awesome. Anyways, so my favorite thing,
Ardent.
other than seeing those
What
guys.
about the veil?
Oh yeah, I had heard later. One of my coworkers was like, "Why didn't you hit the Veil?" And I was
Garden
like, "'Cause
Grove.
I didn't know."
Triple Crossing.
Yeah. So, anyways, my favorite thing is the beer I had at Isley. They have their peanut butter porter, and they have another beer that is their like a blueberry white ale. So it's kind of like a blue
Yeah,
moon with
I've had
blueberries. It's called Plain Jane.
Yeah.
I got the beer that is the mix of them both, and it was called PB&J.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it sounds like a PB&J sandwich.
And it was really good. Now I have a sweet tooth, anyways, and it was very, very sweet. So, warning for those who are Richmond locals and are going to take me up on this recommendation. It is very sweet. So if you don't have a sweet tooth, you might not like it. But I liked it because it was just the right mix of like savory from the peanut butter and sweet from the blueberries and beer. It was great.
Nice.
So yeah, it was good. So that's my favorite thing. In addition to celebrating with my buddy Aaron that he's gonna get murdered.
That's awesome.
Murd.
Yeah.
I'm jealous, both of y'all.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
What's
Good
your
stuff.
favorite thing?
My favorite thing this week was Friday night. I had a chance to finally just sit down and play some video games. So I played Borderlands 3 with a coworker friend of mine. He listens to our show. His name is Jason, so shout out to Jason. I had a blast playing Borderlands 3, and I haven't had like that online friend experience I don't even remember the last time I played a video game like online that was in a long amount of time. Yeah, like I play. Yeah,
I was only up for like an hour.
Yeah, and that was a month ago, or September 13th. So that was like 2 months ago.
Yeah,
and so it doesn't happen very often anymore, but it did, and it hit. And I had one beer. It was awesome. It was 11% Imperial Stout that I picked up downtown. And I don't remember the name of the brewery. Pollo? So Omni Pollo? That's it. Omni Pollo.
Like Pollo or Pollo?
I don't remember.
Not Pollo. It wasn't all chicken.
I don't think so.
Okay.
that does
Omni
sound
chicken
funny.
would be all chicken.
The all
Right.
chicken.
We have the
all hail the all chicken.
The
Because that sounds like a Final Fantasy move right there. It's like Final Fantasy mixed with
Omni
the
Chocobo.
cuckoos from
Omni
Zelda,
Chocobo,
so it's
yeah.
an Omni Cuckoo.
I love it. So I had like one
Omni
big
Chocobo.
beer. It lasted hours, and we had a blast. We were just talking about work and like catching up on personal things and playing the game all at the same time, which is what I love in gaming. So I'm going to say that was my favorite thing.
Did you finish? You've beat it, right?
I did finish the story, but not that night. I had to
I
go back
gotcha.
Saturday and finish it because I'm doing every side quest and taking forever. The game's I'm not done with it yet. Still.
Borderlands. I mean, you don't really totally
This
finish
platinum was
Borderlands.
infinitely easier than the other platinum.
So long.
Did you already platinum it?
Not
Platinumed
really
it
that.
months ago.
Oh, wow.
I platinumed it within like 2 weeks because it's not that hard. You don't have to do any of the class stuff. You don't have to do any of the like all the challenges. You just
Yeah.
have specific things you go after. And
It
it's
is an
done.
easy platinum.
I got
Just
all
long.
of them. I've gotten all of them, and I can say for sure it's the easiest one.
You didn't platinum one.
I haven't platinum one yet. You're right.
right.
So I'm gonna borrow your copy and platinum it.
Why would you
Just out
torture
of
yourself?
spite.
Oh.
All right. That moves us on to our next segment, which is
Ming, ming, ming.
DLC.
Downloadable content.
Yeah, I'm still in a Halloween mood, even though it's been 6 days since Halloween.
And then by the time this launches, everyone's thinking about Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's cool. That's
Sweet.
fine. I'm still gonna roll with this.
All right, go.
So I'm gonna do it, but it's not that bad. It's not
All
that bad. We're gonna play Who Did This?
Yes.
And because again, in the spirit of Halloween, the whole trick or treat thing, like and playing pranks like everyone, so I'm still in. Don't judge me. All right, we're opening up another beer. Let's just make it happen.
Why?
Woo!
Why is it foaming over? Why?
I don't know.
This happened to us last time.
What the heck? It's me.
I think it's my car. No, it's me.
No, it happened to us.
Totally
Oh,
me.
okay.
I
I thought you were
drank one at home
referencing
and it didn't do
the
Oh, the shattered
party
cup from
foul,
the-
yeah.
From the beer pairing episode.
Wow, that's a lot of foam.
I
Yeah.
can't help it.
All right.
A lot of foam. That happened from the beer pairing episode too. I guess that's just my car ride rough. I'm a rough rider.
All right, so what are we drinking this time? You brought this one, Dan.
This is called Rowdy. We drank this last time on our
Line-
last
line 'em up.
episode.
Just
So
line 'em up.
Atlas,
Line them up.
Atlas Rowdy.
I'm pouring 3 glasses here.
Hey, it's very thematic since we're talking about pulling pranks.
Yes. So who did this?
Who
What
did
is-
this?
what
So
is
how
Who
this
Did
works
This?
is I'm going to pick a common Halloween prank, and Kevin's going to pick a game character and any random game character, not knowing, of course, what prank I'm going to pick, and we're going to break that down what that would look like, what the prank would look like in lieu of this particular character. doing it.
Oh.
Make
all
sense?
right. Yeah.
So
I
pick a
think
video
so.
game
We'll see.
character, and I will pick a prank.
Oh, I pick one just first.
Yeah,
and
you don't know.
randomly.
You don't know it. Yeah, you don't know what I'm going to pick, and I
Oh,
don't know
I
what you're going to
just
pick.
have to tell you when I'm ready.
You just have to tell me when you're ready.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And you,
ooh.
Termite, be thinking about a video game character too.
Oh.
something most people would know, but something weird. All right.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
All right. What's your character?
Kirby.
Okay. So Kirby is toilet paper and houses.
Uh-oh.
So first of all,
This could
I'm
be
breaking
really
this down.
weird.
This is my first thought. Kirby goes to a store and picks up a bunch of toilet paper. He inhales that toilet paper, obviously,
Yeah.
and gains TP form.
Hopefully
TP
he gets,
Kirby.
Yes.
Hopefully he gets clean.
So he
toilet
looks like a
paper.
mummy. It's just he's wrapped up in toilet paper. He's a mummy, and he opens his mouth and fires toilet paper rolls.
Oh man,
out
he'd
of
be a
his
machine
mouth.
at that.
Yeah.
Like he'd be so good at that.
Like
would be.
to the point where it's like dangerous.
like,
to the point where it
just like
becomes
spraying toilet paper
like
everywhere.
what is the kingdom? Where does he live? The Star Kingdom or whatever.
Dreamland?
Star Kingdom. Dreamland, like their entire economy grinds to a halt because Kirby has completely toilet papered. Because even though he only inhaled one thing in toilet paper, he can fire unlimited toilet
Right,
paper.
'cause he
So
has the
he's
power.
just like,
he's got the copy ability. Yeah.
yeah, that's how I imagine that.
I would hate to have my house TP'd by Kirby.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that would be a
yeah,
nightmare.
You wouldn't
Worse.
see
'Cause
any
he
house. It
also,
would just
like-
be all toilet paper.
Like he's like not in like he's not an doesn't have the rational mind of an adult either. So he would just go he would go all in.
Yeah.
and just.
Yep.
I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, I think it was the funniest thing. Yep.
He'd probably think he did someone a service. Like, like you're welcome.
Yeah.
Isn't it beautiful?
All right, I've got another prank, Halloween inspired
character.
prank, and you have a character?
I do.
Okay, what's your character?
Zangief.
From
Amazing. Street Fighter 2.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right. So the prank that he's playing is I went a little dark on this one. He is sneaking something into children's candy and handing it out. What is Zangief sneaking into children's candy?
Vodka, of course.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it has to be.
He's Russian.
Yeah.
In Mother Russia,
Oh my gosh, that's good.
candy eat you.
Yeah, exactly. Candy get you drunk.
Yeah, he's got a bucket of like vodka soaked
American children.
I can't even lifesavers like in vodka, and he's like, here you go, trick or treat, and the kids are just like, ooh, it's in water, that's weird,
Yeah.
just eat it, it's fine, and don't worry
He
about
has like little gummy bears, but instead of gummy bears, they're him doing his like body splash thing
Yes.
with like no shirt on, and he goes wow and throws them in and makes the sound.
it. And they're soaked in
And the
vodka.
kids just look at him like, that's weird, and the parents
well, he's
and
a
the
big
parents
scary dude
grab
wearing
their children and
spandex.
say, okay, time to move away.
See, I imagine parents are like, what is... You clearly have soaked these candies in vodka, and he just suplexes them whenever they give him
the spinning pile driver. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, I like that. That was a good Who Did This. So that's the DLC Who Did This. All right, great. We didn't even explain DLC, so people who are first-time listeners who are like, "Oh, my friend Kevin did an episode," they just heard us go right into DLC
Oh, yeah, sure.
without any explanation. So, in hindsight, for those who may be confused, DLC is a little sub-mini conversation that we like to have in our episodes that is more fun, like something you wouldn't have thought you ever would have conversation you would have ever had about games.
Yeah, some little extra on the side that
Yeah.
costs just as much as this podcast
Uh-huh.
does.
Yeah, bonus.
And if you are
It's a
also
bonus bit.
joining
It's a
us,
bonus bit.
if you are also joining us for the first time because Kevin is on the show and he is so amazing and popular that all of his
Wow.
friends and family and coworkers want to listen to us, you can continue to find more episodes of us at 80bitpodsmash.com, which is our landing
Go
website.
there. Do it.
Where you can find links to iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. Any platform that we're not there, let us know, and we'll put ourselves there. We'll make sure we're there. You can also find us on social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit at 80BIT Podsmash, at 80bit Podsmash. Add us there. We also have links to our Discord in every single show note, and you can find us on twitch.tv/80bit Podsmash.
Awesome. So before we go into our main topic for the night, let's take a quick interlude. We poured this beer.
Yes.
I was going to do the whole pouring of the beer between DLC and the main topic, but you kind of jumped the gun and I didn't feel like
Hey man, glasses were
contradicting
empty.
you. So, but now we can talk about the beer. We've already talked and given our impressions on this beer. So, Kevin, I want to hear, what are your thoughts on this beer?
My thoughts are that it's very good. It's by Atlas, which is in DC, and I said I've been there. Now that I think about it, I think I might be getting it confused with another one. But yeah, I love rye. Whether it's like rye whiskey, rye this, rye that, rye bread, I like it all. And anything that's made with rye, I love. And so you have to be pretty bad at making beer to make a rye beer I wouldn't like, which doesn't sound like high praise. That being said, this is actually one of the better ones I've had, so it is quite good. What's it called? Rowdy Rye?
It's just called Atlas Rowdy.
Atlas Rowdy.
I see your joke now. You said something about Prometheus, and Atlas is a corporation in Borderlands, which is on the home
the
planet
percentage is
Prometheus.
only 6.2. That's
Yeah.
surprising. It
Yeah,
tastes
for
a lot
rye ale.
stronger and richer than that.
It's hop
That's
forward, so it's very
good.
hoppy. That's
Yeah, and that's how I love it. Like, rye IPAs are one of my favorite styles of IPA, and they are very rare on the market these days, unfortunately. And they're always fantastic to me.
awesome.
I love how they have pair with barbecued meats and steak and spicy casserole.
that would be
Yeah, I didn't
amazing
read that
with
last
all of
time.
that.
Yup.
Yeah.
Spicy
Sounds
casserole.
But yeah,
I just want a spicy casserole.
the earthy fruitiness of rye is just, and slight spice is just
it's
delicious.
amazing.
Awesome.
It's actually a really good pairing with the Imperial Stout we just
Yeah,
had because they both have
good
that
follow-up to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about the 80s. I was just barely alive in the 80s. It was 1989.
You were
as
an
I've mentioned
infant.
before, I literally was just born. And it was June, so I literally was just the last 6 months of the 80s.
Oh yeah.
So part of the reason why we wanted Kevin to join us is because he was alive. His formative years were in
I
the
was
80s.
born in 1980 itself.
Oh, perfect.
Oh,
so you were
nice.
exactly.
Yep.
Yes, the decade was
I am
your first.
What's the term? X is it?
Gen X.
Is it called crossennial or exennial?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Where it's
It was
like,
actually me. Yeah, it's like from like 80 to 83 or
I think the cutoff
78,
is 80. I think the cutoff of millennial is 85. So I do think that you are technically Generation X.
Yeah.
But you're on the back half.
So we were like watching, X-Men Saturday morning when we were like 11 years old, and
yeah.
like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when we would get home from school while it was live on TV. Voltron was in the early 80s. Transformers was in the mid 80s. All that stuff. Like that's G.I. Joe was mid 80s.
Yeah, so he is our 80s expert. And we thought when we had recorded our episode on the 70s, we had lamented that we had not just invited a guest who was around during the 70s.
Right.
And
But did we even know anyone who gamed? In
I
the
know,
70s?
yeah.
That was the hard
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
But I was also
So now we're
in the 80s.
Yeah, sorry. We didn't want to make that mistake twice, but I wanted to get out.
I was born the single best year in video game history, and that is 1986. And that is because that is the year The Legend of Zelda came out on the
Oh,
year.
I see.
And so I share the age of Hyrule and Link's existence.
Hey, I was the year the Game Boy came out.
Ooh,
that's
that's
a pretty good year,
yeah.
too, right?
My little penguin
true.
boy.
True.
Penguin Boy. They named it after me. I was the Game Boy.
What? Who knew?
I played The Return of Samus on
Yes.
the Game Boy, the one that they remade for the 3DS, which I still have not played.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. That's what I've heard.
All right, so the way we break down these episodes, we talk first about the culture, which we've already kind of hit on some of the culture. Mostly what was the culture like surrounding video games in this decade. That's a very broad, so that includes happenings, big world events that would have shaped and influenced the culture. We talk about the landscape, so what we mean by that is what were the consoles and games that solidified this decade, that were kind of definitive of the 80s. And last, we talk about the business and what was the video game business model like back then, and how was it different from they are now? So how have things changed since then? So we start with culture. So let's talk about the 80s. So being that I was 6 months old at the end of the 80s, I did my research. I love the 80s anyways, because most of 80s culture, even though I was growing up in the 90s, most of 80s culture was still stuff that I was exposed to and enjoyed a lot. But yeah, stuff was happening in the 80s. There was a huge resurgence in conservatism, and that was epitomized by the election of Reagan. And
1980.
and it was kind of the slow spiral of the Cold War was starting to it kind of hit its fever pitch in the late 70s and the 80s, and started to dwindle down. The the nail on that coffin, they say, was Chernobyl, which happened in the mid 80s, and then the Berlin Wall came down the year I was born. So that was kind of that was obviously affecting, America won. America's winning the Cold War. That was very much a part of the cultural landscape of that time. And shoot, there was another one that I had in my mind, another big thing that happened. So I don't know, Chernobyl and conservatism, Reaganism, Reaganomics. Oh, the war on drugs also was hugely influential to the culture.
Yeah.
The whole just say no.
I was just talking to
Dare.
my wife about that the other day. Yeah,
I was a dare kid.
It started with the just say no
Just
with
say
Nancy
no.
Reagan.
Yeah, Nancy
Yep.
Reagan, exactly. So yeah, it was very big. Those are kind of some of the big things. We've talked about some of the big things that have happened in other decades, so I wanted to make sure that we hit some of those. Any other ones that come to mind?
No, I mean, you covered the big ones.
Those are like the deep political kind of
I was
culture
gonna say,
things.
so-
I wanted to hit on like movies.
Sure,
movies. Wow, movies.
and-
So,
So
like,
the advent of
the first movie I
blockbuster.
ever saw in theaters. I mean, I'm pretty sure this came out in '83, which is bizarre that I even remember it. But it was E.T.
Yeah.
that was the
Yep.
first movie I saw. I mean, that was huge. For me, the '80s movies, I just E.T., The Goonies, Star Wars,
Empire.
Yeah, we talked about how like
Empire Strikes
blockbusters.
Back, yeah.
We talked about how blockbusters were born in the 70s, but blockbusters had their prime
Yep.
in
Yeah.
the 80s.
Yeah,
and
was
yeah.
Jaws?
Like Top Gun.
Top Gun.
Yeah, I was gonna say action
Jaws.
movies,
Indiana Jones.
Rambo,
Indiana Jones is-
all
yeah,
the
it's
Stallone
crazy.
and
And how many video games are Rambo probably
Schwarzenegger.
influenced?
Yeah, exactly.
Aliens.
Oh, yeah.
Like all that stuff. Like
yeah, the blockbuster
Terminator,
movies were
it's crazy.
nuts, and then music.
Oh man, like 80s hair metal.
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Queen and
Metallica was
AC/DC.
big in the late 80s.
Uh-huh. Yep.
David Bowie on the pop side.
Yep.
Yeah.
Michael
Journey,
Jackson.
all that.
Oh, yeah.
Jackson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was Prince in the 80s or was
Yeah.
he? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I
Yeah.
thought. So like music was just going through a very like. I've loved the music from the 80s, but a lot of people don't.
Funny that the culture went in a conservative movement, and the idea of the yuppie kind of came out in the 80s too, and that was like the white people that had higher salaries, suburban homes, etc. And then music went the opposite direction. It was rebellious in nature in every way. It was like,
Right.
I don't want to be a man. I'm going to kind of dress androgynously.
Yeah.
Like, David Bowie did that.
Very
And-
glam, yeah.
like glam rock.
Well, and then
big
the
hair
90s,
and perms,
the
for
whole
men.
grunge,
Right,
the whole
right,
grunge movement in the 90s
Right.
was a reaction to the
Right.
glam of the 80s.
Yes.
Which is crazy to think of. The punk rock movement too was
Yeah.
very much a rejection of the sort of
It was
mainstream
when this like
popular music.
postmodern mentality started to come into play too. It's like everyone that was so sure of themselves in the 80s and that conservatism. It's like their kids. It's like they don't want anything to do with that anymore.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like that. I didn't get anything from that. I think of Nirvana. I think of
Yep.
like all those alternative rock bands.
Pink
Their lyrics were just like nonsensical half the time. Like I don't even think they knew what their own lyrics meant. So everyone's like, "What do you think? What does this mean?" And everyone would say, "I think it means this." Nobody actually knew what it means.
Yeah.
So, whereas like old classical art, you knew what it meant, but all that was like open to interpret. Like that just started flourishing, and I think that was a result of a lot of the moral climate, the political climate, the fallout from. Now that there's no wars, now that there's no conflicts, like big ones, what do we do with our lives? So,
How do we perceive of our role in the world without
yeah.
this conflict? Yeah. I know we're not talking about the 90s, but there was a fun story since you mentioned Kurt Cobain or the Nirvana. Kurt Cobain and sort of the nonsensical nature of the postmodern music writing.
Yeah.
Smells like Teen Spirit, the
yeah.
origin of that song.
I don't actually know.
Kurt Cobain didn't know he was being made fun of by one of his friends who wrote on the bathroom wall, Kurt Cobain smells like Teen Spirit. Teen Spirit, of course, being a
female deodorant.
Female deodorant, exactly.
Oh, that's hilarious. And he made a song
He
about
thought it was such a cool, like, yeah, I do smell like Teen Spirit. So he made a song about it.
And it ended up being like their most popular
their
song.
most popular song.
Actually,
of
I
all
think
time. It's so
MTV
funny.
rated the most popular song of the 90s.
Yeah,
Like, it was in there.
MTV came out
Yeah,
in the
MTV
80s.
That's
in
true.
the 80s,
Yeah, yeah.
bringing it back around.
VH1
Yeah, that was
too.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
VH1 is
And
like
the idea
their competitor.
of music videos
Yep.
were huge in
Yeah.
the 80s.
Yep.
And actually, it's funny.
And they
It's
were weird.
The moment someone says 1980s to me, it immediately invokes music videos more than anything else. Like more than video games, more than movies. Like for some
true,
reason, I
yeah.
think of just music videos.
Yeah. I think of comics in the 80s too. We're having
I know
we're
nothing
having
about.
there was a lot
Yeah.
there was a lot of well, they were getting more into that similarly, like edgy and dark. So kind of coming out of that golden age of comics where everyone was in tights, everyone was saving the day. We started to get more into the darker, like Dark Knight version of Batman,
Yeah.
and we got the like Punisher and all that stuff.
The
started to go
beginnings
through
of
dark.
the anti-heroes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was I believe that was all 80s. Correct me if I'm wrong. Comic book nerds.
I think it was.
So yeah, the culture was very, again, like the 70s was all about like it was all about like fight the power, anti-authoritarian, all that good stuff, kind of coming out of that hippie, like not peace and love, but like rise up and do something was the 70s. And then the 80s was all about just like,
We don't
go
know.
on. Like,
Yeah.
like we don't know what to do with this. Like
Everyone's wearing
now.
clothes that clash. There's
Yeah.
no like sense or reason behind a lot of things.
Yeah, so cool.
So then there was video games.
Yeah.
Video games.
And
We're a video game
we
podcast.
actually have like the biggest thing that happened in the video game industry, probably in its history, was in 1983, the video game crash. And that was because the video game market was super, super inundated with tons and tons of video games. They were
It's because they were going through a golden age right before that.
Right.
Yeah, at the
Yeah.
end of 1979 through 1983 was considered the golden age of that early gaming. And then
Well,
Then it all got
everyone wanted
flooded.
to chase after the success of Pong, which was Atari,
Yep.
and Space Invaders, which was the like quintessential game to have for your Atari system. And so you ended up with, today we have what? PlayStation, Microsoft, Nintendo. Right? That's it. Like, and a PC platform if you want to do that too. And so you have 4 main players. Right before the crash happened, you had the Magnavox Odyssey, Intellivision, ColecoVision, Atari, and Vectrex. And that's just some of the consoles that existed. And
I didn't even know what that last one was.
Yeah,
I don't even.
Like, I don't even know what it is either. And that's
that's
taken from a
crazy.
Wikipedia page. But you had that many consoles to support, and you had so many people publishing
Vectrex?
games.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Wow.
Vectrex. And there was no quality control over any of the programmers.
yeah.
And there was
Some of the games were just completely buggy. You couldn't even play them, and they would sold them.
And it's because all of these publishing companies started up, again, chasing after the Atari dollars, hiring like low-grade programmers with no experience, and they were just flooding the market with games. Just get games out.
Yeah.
And they were terrible. And so that ballooned and exploded into the 1983 video game crash.
Sounds like a situation we've got going on now. Games being rushed out and getting terrible as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I would say, well, then that segues us nicely into the landscape. What were the consoles that were definitive? So kind of where culture meets landscape, I would say what you had was an interesting scenario where like you had this bubble that then burst.
Yeah.
And then you had Nintendo come in and fill the void and make a home console that was touted on, well, first it was marketed as a toy.
Right.
And they had all the like Rob and stuff like that came with it.
Yeah,
play
there was
play
this-
games
yeah.
with you.
There was an interesting retailer struggle with like retailers, right? So they don't want anything to do with video games because they were the ones that lost almost the hardest, because if a retailer, if you know, buys in wholesale bulk a bunch of video games to then resell and make a profit. Well, when the video game bubble popped, they were stuck with all these games.
Yeah.
Hence the E.T. famed go out and bury in Arizona desert,
Yeah.
the whole truckload. So the retailers didn't want anything to do with Nintendo in North America. They were like, get out of here with your video games. So Nintendo was smart and saw what they were doing and marketed it as a toy. And it came with Rob, the robot. And that was the first iteration of Rob. It moved discs around. It was kind of cool. Like, here's this toy. And then Nintendo that's also what started their whole idea of, we're going to make everyone buy... If you want to produce a game, if you're ex-developer, you want to make a game for Nintendo, you have to buy the cartridge from Nintendo, you have to buy the circuit board from Nintendo, and you have to submit your software for quality assurance and testing through Nintendo.
Yeah, and that quality, that's definitely what's important to note. Nintendo was the first one that sort of sat down and said, like, you can't just put crap on our platform.
Right.
Like, you need to make sure the games are quality before they get on there. The other thing I want to talk about was we'd be remiss if we talked about the 80s and didn't at least hit on the fact that we had a whole podcast on arcades.
We did.
And so some of this might sound like repetition, but yeah, arcades were big in the 80s.
And how even back then they were sharing with consoles. So Contra came out for Nintendo, and then you see it in the arcade like a year or two later. You're like, what? What's Contra doing in the arcade?
Yeah.
So like they realized, oh, this game's so hard, we can make money off of this. Like, you constantly die in Contra. People are constantly putting in quarters. So there are a lot of ways to make a dime in those arcades, or a quarter rather.
Kevin, a resident 80s gamer, did you spend time in the arcades?
Oh, way too much.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Lay that on us. What did you do?
So
What did
I
it look
got
like?
an allowance like most kids did, and if I could, I would spend it at the arcade. I still remember. Can't remember if my friend Tom that was on my bachelor trip, if he listens to this or not, but it was at his birthday party or mine. We both had it at Aladdin's Castle.
Yes.
And we
remember Aladdin's
which
Castle.
I totally thought was just a Fredericksburg thing, but when you do the research on this, it was like a nationwide thing. There were
We
like
had the Aladdin's
lawsuits and
Castle.
people. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Bally's.
Yeah.
So I had my wallet pickpocketed out of my. I was like, "Where's my wallet?" It was just gone. It was gone. I remember I had like $10 in there that I was going to use just for games, and that's like how many? I can't do that. There's like 40 quarters or something.
Yeah.
50. I don't know.
40.
But anyway,
4 times
yeah,
10.
I spent a lot of time at arcades, mainly playing. I would love to have played more Street Fighter 2, but this was back when people were lining up and you put the quarter on the thing to signify that you were, which is like when I was reading Ready Player One, like that I don't know if it's not in the movie, I don't think. It's in the book where it's got the quarter and it's like glued to it and it has to do something and then it dislodges. So it's like, it's exactly like a throwback to the 80s. This author was playing games in the arcade in the 80s. It's very clear. That was. It was like today you wouldn't just leave money out.
No,
But back then,
no.
like people were just like a little more honorable, and it just means I'm up next, and you'd wait in line to play the champion that's just kicking everybody's butts. Like
Yep.
it was at a chance to. Now it's
It was
like
very communal in its own way, almost asynchronous multiplayer. In a lot of ways,
it was. It's like you lose, you go to the back of the line. You win, the other person goes to the back of the line. It was just really cool.
You know people by their three-letter
Exactly.
initials
Yeah.
of their high score. Yeah.
Yep. Which is why like we didn't want to play on the games that would shut down overnight because it'd lose our
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there were a lot. I remember, I mean, they had Pac-Man and all that stuff, but they had this one game that I didn't see on any list when I was Googling. It was called Sarge. It was one of those top-down ones, like old school Pac-Man, like a table, the screen's facing up.
Yep.
And they had these 2 joysticks, and there was 4 pairs all around, and you would drive these tanks around, like going back and forth with the treads, like the 2 joysticks or the 2 treads, and you'd fire stuff, and you'd just like it was like a free for all against each other. It was so much fun. Like if you saw the graphics, obviously it'd be terrible today, but it would still be just as fun. So yeah.
So other than arcade boxes, which for those who may not have ever encountered an arcade box before, it literally was a giant cabinet that had one game on it.
Yep. Yeah.
And the controls were all custom tailored to those games. So that was a very unique thing
King's
about
Dominion. Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
King's Dominion had some great arcades.
Oh man,
it was a unique thing about gaming back then. From the 70s and the 80s, because now everything is like what we'll talk about with the way Nintendo changed things. But so I would say that is it fair to say then that because the early part of the decade experienced this crash, the middle and then also the early part of the decade had a rise in arcades, and then the NES came out and changed all that. Would it be fair to say that the NES is really the main console that solidified this decade and then dominated?
I would
No,
say
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Totally.
And then '89, you'd see the Game Boy come out, and you'd also see the Sega Genesis. So the console war wouldn't start until the first console war
Well, there
wouldn't
was
start.
the Sega Master System. And
Yeah, but like as soon as Nintendo came, like nobody cared about the Sega Master System anymore. Like I knew one guy that had it. One guy. Everyone else had the Nintendo because the games were just more fun.
Yeah, and so I guess the Sega Genesis would be fair to say that kicked off the first console war, and that wouldn't have been till the end of the decade, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so what consoles solidify the decade? The NES, which is almost unique. I can't. When we talked about the 70s, we talked about Atari and a bunch of other stuff.
Right.
But really, it was the NES that dominated this decade.
And the Game Boy would be a very close second.
But it wouldn't come till the end of the decade. So that was almost more of a 90s thing because that's when more people would have gotten their hands on it.
There was so much IP that came out of the 80s.
Yeah, I was going to say games. Let's talk about games.
So insane. So like I have a list right here. I'm just going to burn through some that almost everyone listening that plays video games should recognize from the 80s. A lot of these are Nintendo. So we got Contra, Centipede, Dig Dug, Donkey Kong, Double Dragon, Dragon's Lair, which I don't know if anyone remembers
the cartoon,
arcade game. Frogger, Gauntlet.
We played Gauntlet.
Ghouls and Ghosts, which they don't make anymore, but they did like 3 of those total. Gradius, the side shooters. Joust. Pac-Man, of course. Pole Position, so all the racing games are born out at that time. Street Fighter, of course. Tron, which I'm mentioning because
Tron.
if you've ever played Tron in the arcade, that game was incredible. Like it was like a full-on, like you hop in this thing and there's like these levers and gadgets and everything that you have to use. Like it was like a mechanical game, even though it was a video game. It was so wild looking. Bomberman.
Yep.
Wolfenstein.
Right,
I forget. 80,
wasn't it
81?
Yeah, wasn't it called
Wow.
Castle Wolfenstein or the Return to like it had
Castle Wolfenstein. Yeah.
So that was
Speaking of Castlevania. Dragon Quest games.
Final Fantasy was in
Duck
that time
Hunt.
too, yeah.
Final Fantasy. King's Quest on the PC. We didn't talk about PC games in the 80s. They're pretty solid too. Legend of Zelda, of course. Phantasy Star. Like, I mean, it just keeps getting Prince of Persia.
Whoa, was that really as early as the 80s?
Yeah, SimCity was like 89 as well. Tetris games.
Tetris was 80s? Yeah, I guess that it was 80s. Yeah.
Ultima, which Ultima was popular for like 2 decades and then it kind of fell off the planet.
Richard Garriott.
Yeah, I mean, there was just so many games born out of that time that are still in play today.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's awesome. Yeah, so those are the games that came out of the decade. And yeah, I mean, that...
And there's
even
more.
I feel like... That's what's crazy to me, and we've talked about this before, is like the 80s, 90s, and even early aughts saw this just like renaissance of IPs, IP, that you don't see today anymore. Like everything's a sequel, everything's a reboot, everything's a remake, everything is just it's cannibalized. Like we've become an intellectual cannibal culture as opposed to, and there's some new stuff, Death Stranding, Horizon Zero Dawn, like there's new stuff coming out. But
Outer Worlds.
Yeah, Outer Worlds, yeah, but it's all like, but yeah, few of it is actually new stuff, and I really wish we could get back to just
the newness. So like that's something I wonder too, is if I hear about a new game coming out like Death Stranding, and then I hear about a game coming out called Borderlands 3, my immediate instinct is like, well, if I had a choice, I'm going to get Borderlands 3 because I know it's good.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Or at least there's a good chance of it being good. I don't want to risk a game being bad. And I'm like, this mentality didn't exist 30 years ago.
Nope.
It was like, there's a new game out. Cool, I want to play it. And that's as simple as it was.
And all you
Like,
had was, in some cases, all you had was the box art to go by.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And if you look
That's
at
it.
Mega Man,
That's it.
have you seen the box art for
it's
It's
terrible.
nothing
It's
like the
terrible.
game at all.
I mean,
Not even close.
this is why. I mean, I guess it's not even done anymore. But I can't think of any store that does it. But I mean, people talk about Blockbuster Video, and we had like this store called Video Club in Fredericksburg, and I rented games in there like once or twice a week. My mom would let me go in there, and
That's how we did too.
Like I didn't buy many games; we just rented all the time.
Yep.
And it was like there were so many games that were both good and so many games that were horrible, like unplayable.
fun thing is, as a kid,
they would not pass beta testing today. They were so bad. So,
there's as a kid though, I played a lot of games that like now I'm like, oh, this is horrible. But back then I was like, this is the best game of all time. There's a bit of rose color.
it felt like the
going on.
Wild West of like video games. It's like you just don't know what you're gonna. It could be something amazing, could be garbage.
Yeah, I don't know
just
if
give
that's
it a shot.
because we were that whole phenomenon you're talking about is just being like, we just saw it looked good, and we played it.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's because we were kids. Like, if adults at the time were into it, would they have been similarly like, well, I want quality and I want what I can trust? Is that a grown up thing? Is that just something that's a side effect of now? The gamers who grew up in the 80s and the 90s are now adults and now have changed the way they purchase games, or is it a shift in our culture? It may be a bit of both. Like, I think it's probably a bit of both, but yeah, there's definitely an aspect.
Older and more discerning of like,
and games are still more expensive. They are definitely still a luxury item. I guess when we talked about inflation, they're actually less expensive now.
They
than
are.
before.
Yeah, they are.
So
Because
But
they used to be $50 30 years ago, and guess how much they are today?
60.
Exactly.
If you look at
It's like-
what $50 was worth 30 years ago today,
it'd be like $200.
Yeah.
We're basically paying the equivalent of the Neo Geo games back then, which were $200.
Yeah. So there's also this is gaming in general is new. It came out in the 70s, really, in fervor. I mean, it was experimental in the 50s and 60s, but really, video games came out in the 70s. It's the newest form of like art, pop culture in our society. We don't have people retiring playing video games unless they were like grandma picking up a Wii, right? Like this will be
it's so exceptionally rare. Yeah.
Right. When we get old enough, the Gen Xers would probably be the oldest ones because the ones older than them would be baby boomers, and they're the people retiring now. So when Gen Xers retire, that'll be an entire generation of people that grew up playing games for the first time in nursing homes, like gamers in nursing homes. That's weird, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exist. So what you guys were talking about with as kids, we have these rose-colored glasses, or we're just one of them dumb kids that go see a game and go check it out, and we're excited about it, versus a conscious adult spending what we trust. That's reflective in the market today because there is so many sequels and reboots.
I think it has
the people making the games are taking the safe route, and
I also
they're making
think, I also think it's not just on the consumer level; it's also on the producer level.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
There's so much.
There's no new IP anymore.
They're also so much more expensive to make. You know what I mean? Like, so it's so much more expensive to make.
So the risk is higher.
The risk of exactly a flop is higher. So I do think it's something that has to do with the culture of business, which transitions us nicely into what was the business model like back then. How is it different from now? Well, we'll start by talking about now. Now it's just so bloated, whereas back then, like a couple guys could put together a game. So, like 4 guys in a basement could put together a game, publish it on Nintendo, on the NES, obviously with some quality control to make sure it was a good game.
Got a lot of money.
And a good amount of money, yeah. But that was more feasible and realistic. So that's why we got this explosion of IP, because we had more people that were willing to take risks because it wasn't as expensive to make them.
Yeah. The thing of the modern day time that happened, the Stardew Valley game. That guy that like almost gave up everything, and
he
like,
did.
His girlfriend left, and
it's a crazy
and then
story.
eventually like got it all back and then some because it got hugely popular. It's like
pretty much what
it just doesn't happen like that was normal kind of back then,
right?
And now it's like
it's only indie games that do that. Like small independent studios that
and it's interesting too that the indie games usually tend to throw back to the older games.
Yeah, they do.
It's like they're just like I mean, I remember the first. I don't even know if I guess it wasn't technically an indie game, but it felt like it. So I don't know if you ever played for Xbox 360 the Bionic Commando remake.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So like it was super fun, and
Was
it
it
really
really?
was just like the original.
I didn't like
except
Bionic
with
Commando.
modern day graphics. Even though no, I didn't like the original either, but they made it more approachable.
Okay,
and it was actually playable and fun.
I think I have that game.
Like it was.
Yeah,
I'm like that. It was just such a great thing that they did. It was a perfect throwback. It was modern day graphics, but it was still a side scroll, and like they did with the Return of Samus, the Samus Returns Game Boy thing. It was the same deal. But I just find it interesting that indie games like they're not like usually huge. They're like yesteryear graphics, and they're still really great games, which just goes to show like games are not graphics. Games are not like. They don't always have to be 3D.
Yeah.
They don't always have to be super immersive. They don't always have to be like deadpan serious and like the stake of the universe is at stake. And they can be
that
like
was the aughts, right?
a guy jumping up and down, stomping on mushrooms and turtles.
Right.
Yep.
That's how it all kind of started anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So bringing it back to the business in the 80s, we had hit on some of these ideas beforehand, but I will say the business model in the 80s, the whole, if you look at the history, it was in flux. So
absolutely. Yeah.
what we see happening in the 80s, emerging from this bubble that has just popped, emerging from this time when like every game was on its own, like every console, they were making the games in the console, and so you saw the emergence of the third-party publisher, you saw the emergence of quality control in Nintendo. These are business practices that started in the 80s that like set the template for what gaming would look like now. Really started to set that forward, kind of formed in the 80s. So that's kind of a compare and contrast. That's the way it compares is, 79, Activision came onto the scene, and so the 80s were defined by, in a lot of ways, the emergence of third-party publishers publishing on a platform, whereas opposed to Atari, they were making all their own games, and all ColecoVision and all these other game consoles, they were making their own games.
Except for Activision, who was making games for all
then
of them.
Activision came out and was like, hey, I'm going to make games for all of them, and then continued to make games for
Forever.
Nintendo. That's what I'm trying to say. They gave forever, yeah. Much to our chagrin, continued to make games forever. But they're also, they in the 80s they were like, okay, cool, Nintendo's the selling console, so let's make games for them. So,
And
I don't even know what Activision games were on NES.
Pitfall.
Pitfall?
On NES. Pitfall was Activision and Atari. For Nintendo, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm sure.
Yeah,
there's
Activision had good classics.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Before they sold their souls to Bobby Kotick.
There were so many like good game companies back then. Like, it got to the point where even as a kid, I could recognize like, oh, if that company makes games, probably good.
Yeah.
So Konami, like when they were new.
Yeah.
Capcom,
Data East.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone like Data East games were great.
Joe
I don't
and
know
Mac
what
for
happened.
Super Nintendo was amazing.
Yeah.
But that's 90s.
Bad Dudes. Didn't Data East make Bad Dudes?
I don't know.
This is a good game too. This stereotypical 80s, these two tough guys. Like the president gets kidnapped, so they gotta go rescue him. They have to fight ninjas, and they have guns. Like, of course, it's insane. It's very 80s.
Capcom was a good publisher too.
Oh yeah,
Mega Man.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, oh yeah.
Capcom's still a good publisher.
I know,
yeah.
they
Let's
are.
be real.
Yeah.
Well, I still bust out the NES Classic and play Mega Man 2. It's still like my favorite NES game ever is Mega Man 2.
Well, you can see, I can see, talking about the business in the 80s, I can see Nintendo was already starting prototyping essentially their reputation as a company that takes risks and innovates.
Yeah.
You can see it just right there at the end of the decade. They dropped the Game Boy on the world, and it was the first portable console that could play multiple games and did its thing.
Yeah,
cartridge based. Yep, exactly. And so like that just completely changed. That would prototype mobile gaming. That would prototype this Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
All of the innovations. It tangentially related to things like the Wii and stuff like that, and all of Nintendo's portable consoles, where they would say, "Hey, we're gonna do something different. We're gonna buck up against the norm and try something different. And that, again, they continue to do that today. It's surprised we haven't talked about Nintendo more on this 80s podcast where Nintendo is king.
I was going to say, well, funny you should say that. I was actually thinking about PC games and how, like, you know, PC games were still around just as much as anything else was.
They were nuts. PC games were crazy popular in Europe.
Like, they were just such a different ball game back then. So you didn't have game like... I was just going to say you didn't have games like Mario Brothers. Actually, we had an Amiga 500, and we had this game called the Great Gianna Sisters, or Gianna, I don't know how it's pronounced. Mm-hmm. And it was little, as in the Super Mario Brothers, the Great Gianna Sisters. Like, it was cool. So the game was played similar to Mario Brothers. It was actually more fun, and it was kind of crazier and darker. Like, it was weird, because PC could go dark. Like, Nintendo didn't go dark.
Right.
Not like gory, that kind of dark. It was just weird. The soundtrack was a little dark. But anyway, that's an aside. Apart from that, like, most PC games are very different. So you had all the Quest games, right? Like Police Quest, King's Quest, Space Quest. Those like late 80s and mid
like
late
adventure
80s
games, right?
Yeah, they were like the point. At first, they started. You type run to elevator, and then the character, like, you have to type the command. Eventually, they were point and click. They were enormously huge back then. But other than that, they didn't have much until the 90s. They had to catch up, and of course now you have the whole PC master race debate thing going on. Yeah, but
it's great you mentioned that, because even Ready Player One, a lot of the lore that he draws from is from the PC gaming.
Yeah,
the Commodore 64,
the mud games. Yeah,
and what was the underground temple? It's caves.
Was
that just called Adventure?
Was it called Adventure?
There was, and then there was
called Adventure.
Zork.
Zork.
That's
Zork.
it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the one. So those like started the adventure genre in video games.
Well, and a lot of those consoles, a lot of those computers were in a lot of ways basically consoles, because they could do so few things, and games were one of the few things they could do. Games and word processing. It's like all they could really do back then.
Calculations.
Anyways. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, the Commodore 64, for all intents and purposes, was a game console as well as, in everything but name. It was, and maybe with additional functionality, it was a game console. So
that was when I said Amiga 500, Commodore and Amiga were the same.
Yeah,
So I just noticed as I was scrolling through my list, I never mentioned Shadow of the Beast. They came out in '89. I swear they were doing a remake of that at some point. It was like an indie remake for some modern console.
It does sound,
I think it was just going to be
familiar.
called Beast.
Huh.
That game was amazing. The company that put that out, Psygnosis, they had some really good games. Though I think they might have been... Shadow of the Beast says 89. The rest of them, that might have been 90s that they made.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to stop. So that's the 80s in gaming.
Fun stuff.
Yeah.
I hope y'all...
80s are great.
Yeah, I think it was... I hope it was a fun decade. I was conceived in it, so I imagine there was a little bit of fun for some people.
It was fun. It was weird. Nobody knew what was going on, really.
That's awesome. Great.
Maybe that's just me talking because I was like 5 years old and I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, you definitely didn't know what was going on. All right, so that's where we're going to end. If you have any thoughts, if you were born in the 80s or raised in the 80s or grew up in the 80s, and you have additional thoughts, things we missed, whether it has to do with the culture, the landscape, or the business of games in the 80s, that you want to add, Termite will tell you where you can find us.
I'll give you the summary. It's just our Discord is the quickest interactivity platform that you can hit us up on the show notes. The link is there. Just go, join our Discord server where we have live chats. Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at 80bit Podsmash. We have a subreddit. You can create a thread there and start a conversation. You can also email us 80bitpodsmash@gmail.com.
Awesome. And Kevin, thank you for joining us. Do you want the good people of the internet to find you?
I don't even know where they'd find me.
Okay, I didn't know if you have like a blog or something.
I recently created a new Reddit account, and I couldn't think of a name, and so the only thing that was on my mind was something Final Fantasy related, so it's 00 Chocobo.
Nice.
I have almost no posts.
Awesome. That is great.
It's like literally 00 Chocobo.
Well,
nice.
Give him some karma or upvote him on Reddit. I'm not quite
Speaking
sure
of 80s.
if things like that can happen directly.
I doubt it.
Find his posts or draw him out into a post. I don't know, whatever. So yeah, that's Kevin. Thank you for joining us, Kevin, and giving us your 80s expertise. I feel showered in 80s knowledge. It's kind of gross, actually. I feel A little dirty.
It was grimy.
80s.
People didn't wear deodorant, that kind of thing.
80s sweat showers. What we're going with now.
In the 70s, they made their own. In the 80s, they just gave up. They're like, nah,
this doesn't work.
But in the 60s, they probably didn't use it either.
Right. Yeah.
It was probably,
in the 90s,
it was probably in
Teen
fashion
Spirit,
to
so.
smell.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Kevin. And Pod Smashers, you can look forward to next week. We'll be talking about something.
Black Friday?
And it is...
Oh,
is it?
man.
Is it really Black Friday already?
Oh, man.
I think so. I think you're right.
Ooh, I would say on the side that while you guys are looking that up, I have been playing some Divinity 2 with my wife.
Oh, nice.
And that game is amazing. It's not 80s. I'm totally cheating right now. But if you're into games like Baldur's Gate, but you want the complete time sink that Baldur's Gate is, play Divinity. Nice. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's not coming out on Black Friday, but we will be, as our Thanksgiving episode this year, we will be talking about Black Friday and the effect that it has had on the business of gaming.
All right.
That'll be fun. All right, cool. Well, then we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Peace.